Good morning. I thank all of y'all for coming to this little reading of the Cantos of Mutability. Edmund Spenser wrote, it's just 2 cantos that were not published during his lifetime. During his lifetime, when he wrote The Fairy Queen, he had planned to write 12 books, but only 6 of them were finished and published before he passed away. He died awfully young. He was 41 or 42 when he died. So the Cantos of Mutability were found later on, and they're assumed to be part of what would have been the next book of the Fairy Queen. So they're usually included, most copies of it. And mine, let's see, I'm reading from this one. Mine, this is the Penguin. So this is the one that I always use to read aloud because I like the text is clean. There are no footnotes. Mine is in 3 sections now because I've read it until it has fallen apart. So So before we start, I want to give a little bit of background. There's a lot of classical allusion in this canto specifically. The character mutability just means change, or the ability to change. She is called a Titaness, so meaning that she's one of the Titans. So you need to know a little bit of the backstory because you need to know how it comes to us through the classical tradition, but also so that you get the references. But then she changes the story. She changes her ancestry and who she is for her own purposes. So you kind of need to know what the story is. So you all probably know that first there was Father Sky and Mother Earth, the Uranus and Gaia. And I'm going to use the Roman names because those are the names that Spenser uses. And they had many children. Their first children were just monstrous being, and Uranus hated them. So he shoved them back into Mother Earth. But this, of course, made her angry. And after a long time, when she had given birth to more children, the Titans, who were gigantic beings, they weren't the giants. There's another group of siblings that are called the giants. So she gave birth to the Titans, one of whom was Saturn, or you may know him by Kronos as his Greek name. And Gaia, Mother Earth, wanted to punish the Father Sky for what he had done. And Saturn was the only one who was willing to help her. And so he attacked the father, wounded him, and then made himself king over everything. So then Saturn eventually had a prophecy that one of his sons would do basically the same thing to him. And he decided, well, I don't want that to happen. So he just ate all of his children. And so finally, when his last child, Zeus or Jupiter, was born, Jupiter's mother went and got a bunch of her followers, the Corybantes. The Corybantes are a group of wild women, and had them make a loud ruckus while he was being born in order to cover the sounds of his birth so that she could hide him secretly. And then she gave her husband, she gave Saturn a stone to eat instead. So then y'all probably know how the rest of that story goes, that eventually Jupiter grew up and cut open the father, or made him disgorge all of his siblings. So keep that in mind, though, that Saturn was the one who became king because he threw down a tyrant and he became the king. But then he became a tyrant himself, and so he was overthrown by his own son. So that's kind of the background of what goes on here with this Titaness mutability. So 2 cantos of mutability, which both for form and matter appear to be parcel of some following book of the Fairy Queen under the legend of Constancy, never before imprinted. Canto VI, the Spenser started writing in the middle of his story, and then he went back and filled out. Canto VI, proud change, not pleased in mortal things beneath the moon to reign, pretends as well as gods as men to be the sovereign. What man that sees the ever-whirling wheel of change, the which all mortal things doth sway, but that thereby doth find and plainly feel how mutability in them doth play her cruel sports to many men's decay? Which that to all may better yet appear, I will rehearse that will in my heard say, how she at first herself began to rear against all the gods, and the empire sought from them to bear. But first here falleth fittest to unfold her antique race and lineage old, as I have found it registered of old in fairyland amongst records permanent. She was, to weet, a daughter by descent of those old Titans, which did whilom strive with Saturn's son for heaven's regiment, whom, though high Jove of kingdom did deprive, yet many of their stem long after did survive. And many of them afterwards obtained great power of Job and high authority, as Hecate, in whose mighty hand he placed all rule and principality, to be by her disposed diversely to gods and men, as she them list divide. And dread Bellona, that doth sound on high wars and alarms unto nations wide, that makes both heaven and earth to tremble at her pride. So likewise did this Titaness aspire rule and dominion to herself to gain, that as a goddess men might her admire, and heavenly honors yield as to them twain. And first on earth she sought to obtain, where she such proof as sad examples showed of her great power, to many one's great pain, that not men only whom she soon subdued, but eke all other creatures her bad doings rued. For she the face of earthly things so changed, that all which nature had established first in good estate and in meet order ranged, she did pervert, and all their statutes burst, and all their world's fair frame, which none yet durst of gods or men to alter or misguide, she altered quite, and made them all accursed that God had blessed, and did at first provide in that still happy state forever to abide. Nay, she the laws of nature only break, but eke of justice and of policy, and wrong of right, and bad of good did make, and death for life exchanged foolishly, since which all living wights have learned to die, and all this world is waxen daily worse. O piteous work of mutability, by which we all are subject to that curse, and death instead of life have sucked from our nurse. And now when all the earth she thus had brought to her behest, enthralled to her might, she began to cast in her ambitious thought, to attempt the empire of the heavens' height, and Jove himself to shoulder from his right. And first she passed the region of the air and of the fire, whose substance thin and light made no resistance, nor could her contraire, but ready passage to her pleasure did prepare. Thence to the circle of the moon she climbed, where Cynthia reigns in everlasting glory, to whose bright shining palace straight she came, all fairly decked with heaven's goodly story, whose silver gates, by which there sat an hoary old aged sire, with hourglass in hand, hight Time. She entered where he were sorry, nay stayed till she the high and where Cynthia did sit, that never did stand. Her sitting on an ivory throne she found, drawn of two steeds, one black, the other white, environed with 10,000 stars round, that duly her attended day and night. And by her side there ran her page, that hight Vesper, whom we the evening star intend, that with his torch, still twinkling like twilight, her lightened all the way where she should wend, and joy to weary wandering travelers did lend. That when the hardy Titaness beheld the goodly building of her palace bright, made of the heaven's substance, and upheld with 1,000 crystal pillars of huge height, she began to burn in her ambitious sprite, and to envy her that in such glory reigned, eftsoon she cast by force and torturous might, her to displace, and to herself to have gained the kingdom of the night and waters by her reign. So boldly she bid the goddess down descend, and let herself into that ivory throne, for she herself more worthy thereof wend, and better able to guide it alone, whether to men whose fall she did bemoan, or unto gods whose state she did malign, or to the infernal powers her need give loan of her fair light, and bounty most benign, herself of all that rule she deemed most condign. But she that had to her that sovereign seat by highest Jove assigned, therein to bear night's burning lamp, regarded not her threat, nay yielded aught for favor or for fear, but with stern countenance and disdainful cheer, bending her horned brows, did put her back, and boldly blaming her for coming here, bade her at once from heaven's coast to pack, or at her peril bide the wrathful thunder's rack. Yet neithermore the giantess forbear, but boldly pressing on, wrought forth her hand to pluck her down perforce from her chair, and therewith lifting up her golden wand, threatened to strike her if she did withstand. Whereat the stars which round about her blazed, and eke the moon's bright wagon, did still stand as being all so bold attempted amazed, and on her uncouth habit and stern look still gazed. Meanwhile the lower world, which nothing knew of all that chanced there, was darkened quite. And eke the heavens and all the heavenly crew of happy wights, now unpurveyed of light, were much afraid and wondered at that sight, fearing lest chaos had broken his chain and brought again on them eternal night. But chiefly Mercury, that next doth reign, ran forth in haste unto the King of gods to complain. All ran together with a great outcry to Jove's fair palace fixed in heaven's height, and beating at his gates full earnestly, gan call to him aloud with all their might, to know what meant that sudden lack of light. The father of the gods, when this he heard, was troubled much at their so strange a fright, doubting lest Typhon were again upreared, or other his old foes that sorely feared. Eftsoons the son of Maia forth he sent down to the circle of the moon, to know the cause of this so strange astonishment, and why she did her wonted course forslow, and if that any were on earth below that did with charms or magic molest, him to attack and down to hell throw. But if from heaven it were, then to arrest the author, and him bring before his presence pressed. The winged foot god so fast his plumes did beat, that soon he came whereas the Titaness was striving with fair Cynthia for her seat. At whose strange sight and haughty hardiness he wondered much, and feared her no less, but laying fear aside to do his charge, at last he bade her with bold steadfastness cease to molest the moon to walk at large, or come before high Jove her doings to discharge. And therewithal he on her shoulder laid his snaky wreathed mace, whose awful power doth make gods and hellish fiends afraid. Whereat the Titaness did sternly lour, and stoutly answered that in evil hour he from his Jove such message to her brought, to bid her leave fair Cynthia's silver bower, sith she his Jove and him esteemed not, no more than Cynthia's self, but all their kingdoms sought. And heaven's herald stayed not to reply, but passed away, his doings to relate unto his lord, who now in the highest sky was placed in his principal estate, with all the gods about him congregate, to whom when Hermes had his message told, it did them all exceedingly amate, save Jove, who changing not his countenance bold, did unto them at length these speeches wise unfold. Hearken to me a while, ye heavenly powers. Ye may remember, since the earth's cursed seed sought to assail the heaven's eternal towers, and to us all exceeding fear did breed. But how we then defeated all their deeds, ye all do know, and them destroyed quite, yet not so quite, but that there did succeed an offspring of their blood, which did alight upon the fruitful earth, which doth us yet despite. And of that bad seed is this bold woman bred, that now both bold presumption doth aspire to thrust fair Phoebe from her silver bed, and eke ourselves from heaven's high empire, if that her might were matched to her desire. Wherefore it now behooves us to advise what way is best to drive her to retire, whether by open force or counsel wise, read ye sons of God, as best you can devise. So having said, he ceased, and with his brow, his black eyebrow, whose doomful dreaded beck is wont to wield the world unto his vow, and even the highest powers of heaven to check, made sign to them in their degrees to speak, who straight gan their counsel grave and wise. Meanwhile, the earth's daughter, though she not did reck of Hermes' message, yet can now advise what course were best to take in this hot, bold emprise. Eftsoon she thus resolved that whilst the gods, after return of Hermes' embassy, were troubled and amongst themselves at odds, before they could new counsels re-ally to set upon them in ecstasy, and take what fortune, time, and place would lend. So forth she rose, and through the purest sky to Jove's high palace straight cast to ascend, to prosecute her plot. Good onset bodes good end. She there arriving, boldly did pass where all the gods she found in council close, all quite unarmed, as then their manner was. At sight of her, they sudden all arise with great amaze, they wist what way to choose, but Jove, all fearless, forced them to abide, and in his sovereign throne gan straight dispose himself more full of grace and majesty, that mote him cheer his friends and foes mote terrify. that when the haughty Titaness beheld, all were she fraught with pride and impudence, yet with the sight thereof she almost quelled, and inly quaking, seemed as reft of sense and void of speech in that dread audience, until that Jove himself herself bespake. Speak, thou frail woman, speak with confidence. Whence art thou, and what dost thou now here make? What idle errand hast thou earth's mansion to forsake? She, half confused with his great command, yet gathering spirit of her nature's pride, him boldly answered thus to his demand. I am a daughter by the mother's side of her that is grandmother magnified of all the gods, great earth, great chaos child. But by the father's, be it not envied, I greater am in blood whereon I build than all the gods, though wrongfully from heaven exiled. For Titan, as ye all acknowledge must, was Saturn's elder brother by birthright, both sons of Uranus, but by unjust and guileful means through Corybantes' slight, the younger thrust the elder from his right, since which thou, Jove, injuriously have held the heavens' rule from Titan's sons by might, and them to hellish dungeons down hast felled. Witness, ye heavens, the truth of all that I have told. While she thus spake, the gods that gave good ear to her bold words had marked well her grace, being of stature tall as any there of all the gods, and beautiful of face as any of the goddesses in place, stood all astonished like a sort of steers, amongst whom some beast of strange and foreign race unawares is chanced, far straying from his peers. So did their ghastly gaze bewray their hidden fears. Till, having paused a while, Jove thus bespake. Will never mortal thought cease to aspire in this bold sort, to heaven claim to make, and touch celestial seats with earthly mire? I would have thought that bold Procrustes' hire, or Typhon's fall, or proud Ixion's pain, or great Prometheus tasting of our ire, would have sufficed the rest to restrain, and warned all men by their example to refrain. But now this offscum of that cursed fry dare to renew the like bold enterprise, and challenge the heritage of this our sky, whom what should hinder, but that we likewise should handle as the rest of our allies, and thunder drive to hell. With that he shook his nectar-dewed locks, and with the skies and with all the world beneath for terror quook, and eft his burning Levenbrand in hand he took. But when he looked in her lovely face, in which fair beams of beauty did appear, that could to the greatest wrath soon turn to grace, such sway doth beauty even in heaven bear, he stayed his hand, and having changed his cheer, he thus again in milder wise began. But if God should strive with flesh of fear, then shortly should the progeny of man be rooted out, if Jove should still do what he can. But thee, fair Titan's child, I rather ween through some vain error or inducement light to see that mortal eyes have never seen, or through example of thy sister's might, Bellona, whose great glory thou despite, since thou hast seen her dreadful power below mongst wretched men, dismayed with her fright, to bandy crowns and kingdoms to bestow, and sure thy worth no less than hers doth seem to show. But wilt thou this, thou hardy Titaness, that not the worth of any living wight may challenge aught in heaven's interest, much less the title of old Titan's right? For we, by conquest of our sovereign might, and by eternal doom of fate's decree, have won the empire of the heavens bright, which to ourselves we hold, and to whom we shall worthy deem partakers of our bliss to be. Then cease thy idle claim, thou foolish girl, and seek by grace and goodness to obtain that place from which thy folly Titan fell. Thereto thou mayest perhaps, if thou fain, have Jove thy gracious lord and sovereign. So having said, she thus to him replied, Cease, Saturn's son, to seek by proffers vain of idle hopes to allure me to thy side, for to betray my right, therefore I have it tried. But thee, O Jove, no equal judge I deem of my desert, or of my dewful right, that in thine own behalf mayest partial seem, but to the highest him that is hight, Father of gods and men of equal might, to which the God of nature I appeal. Thereat Jove, waxed wroth, and in his sprite did inly grudge, yet did it well conceal, and bade Dan Phoebus scribe her appellation seal. Eftsoons the time and place appointed were, where all both heavenly powers and earthly wights before great nature's presence should appear, for trial of their titles and best rights. That was to eat upon the highest heights of Arlo Hill. Who knows not Arlo Hill? That is the highest head in all men's sights of old Father Mole, whom shepherds quill, renowned hath with hymns fit for a rural skill. Just an aside, he's talking about things that he's written about in the shepherd's calendar. So he's assuming everybody has read his older poetry and knows these places from reading his the shepherd's calendar. So there's going to be a trial on Arlo Hill. And were it not ill-fitting for this file to sing of hills and woods, mongst wars and nights, I would abate the sternness of my style, mongst those stern sounds to mingle soft delights, and tell how Arlo, through Diana's spites, being of old the best and fairest hill that was in all this holy island's heights, was made the most unpleasant and most ill. Meanwhile, O Clio, lend Calliope thy quill. So he's going to tell the story of how Arlo used to be beautiful, but now in the present day, it's wrecked. So in the time when the story happened, he says it was beautiful, but it's bad now. So he's going off on a digression now. When Ireland flourished in fame of wealths and goodness, far above the rest of all that bear the British Islands name, the gods then used for pleasure and for rest, oft to resort thereto, when seemed them best. But none of all therein more pleasure found than Cynthia, that is sovereign queen professed of woods and forests, which therein abound, sprinkled with wholesome waters more than most on ground. But amongst them all as fittest is her game, either for chase of beasts with hound or bow, or for to shroud in shade from Phoebus' flame, or bathe in fountains that do freshly flow, or from high hills, or from the dales below. She chose this Arlo, where she did resort with all her nymphs and ranged in a row, with whom the woody gods did oft consort. For with the nymphs the satyrs loved to play and sport. Amongst the which there was a nymph that hight Mulana, daughter of old Father Mole, and sister unto Mulla, fair and bright, unto whose bed false Bragog Willem stole, that shepherd Colin dearly did condole, and made her luckless loves well known to be. But this Mulana, were she not so shoal, were so no less fair and beautiful than she. Yet as she is, a fairer flood may no man see. For first she springs out of two marble rocks, on which a grove of oaks high mounted grows, that as a garland seems to deck the locks of some fair bride, brought forth with pompous shows out of her bower, with many flowers strows. So through the flowery dales she tumbling down, through many woods and shady coverts flows, that on each side her silver channel crown, till to the plain she come, whose valley she doth drown. In her sweet streams Diana used oft, after her sweaty chase and toilsome play, to bathe herself, and after on the soft and downy grass her dainty limbs to lay in covert shade, where none behold her may, for much as she hated sight of living eye. Foolish god Faunus, though full many a day he saw her clad, yet longed foolishly to see her naked amongst her nymphs in privity. No way he found to compass his desire, but to corrupt Mulana, this her maid, her to discover for some secret hire. So her with flattering words he first assayed, and after pleasing gifts for her purveyed, queen apples and red cherries from the tree, with which he allured and betrayed, to tell what time he might her lady see when she herself did bathe, that he might secret be. Thereto he promised, if she would him pleasure with this small boon, to quit her with a better, to weet that, whereas she had out of measure long loved the Fanchon, who by naught did set her, that he would her undertake, for this to get her to be his love, and of him like it well. Besides all which he vowed to be her debtor for many more good turns than he would tell, the least of which this little pleasure should excel. The simple maid did yield to him anon, and eft him placed where he close might view that never any saw, save only one, who for his hire to so foolhardy due was of his hounds devoured in hunter's hue. Though as her manner was on a sunny day, Diana with her nymphs about her drew to the sweet spring, where doffing her array, she bathed her lovely limbs, for Jove a likely prey. There Faunus saw that pleased much his eye, and made his heart to tickle in his breast, that for great joy of somewhat he did spy, he could not him contain in silent rest, but breaking forth in laughter, loud professed his foolish thought. A foolish fawn indeed, that canst not hold thyself so hidden blessed, but wouldst needs thine own conceit or read, babblers, unworthy dean of so divine a meed. The goddess, all abashed at that noise, in haste forth started from the guilty brook, and running straight where she heard his voice, and closed the bush about, and there him took, like dared lock, not daring up to look on her whose sight before so much he sought. Thenceforth they drew him by the horns, and shook nigh all to pieces, they left him not. And then unto the open light they forth him brought. Like as an husband with a busy care thinks to her diary to make wondrous gain, finding whereas some wicked beast unware that breaks into her dairy house, there doth drain her creaming pans, and frustrate all her pain, hath in some snare or gin set close behind, and trapped him, and caught him in her train. Then thinks what punishment were best assigned, and thousand deaths deviseth in her vengeful mind. So did Diana, and her maidens all use silly Faunus, now within their bale. They mock and scorn him, and him forth miscall. Some by the nose him plucked, some by the tail, and by his goatish beard some did hail. Yet he, poor soul, with patience all did bear, for naught against their wills might countervail. Nay, aught he said, whatever he did hear, but hanging down his head, did like a mome appear. At length, when they had flattered him their fill, they gan to cast what penance him they could give. Some would have him gelt, but that same would spill the wood god's breed, which must forever live. Others would through the river him have driven, and ducked deep, that seemed penance light. But most agreed that did this sentence give, him in deer skin to clad, and in that plight to hunt him with their hounds, himself save how he might. But Cynthia's self, more angry than the rest, thought not enough to punish him in sport, and of her shame to make a gamesome jest, began examine him in straighter sort, which of her nymphs or other close consort him thither brought, and her to him betrayed. He much afeared, to her confessed short, that was Molana, which her so bewrayed. Then all at once their hands upon Molana laid. But him, according as they had decreed, with a deer skin they covered, and then chased with all their hounds that after him did speed. But he more speedy from them fled more fast than any deer. So sore him dread aghast. They after followed with all shrill outcry, shouting as they the heavens would have brast, that all the woods and dales where he did fly did ring again, and loud re-echo to the sky. So they him followed till they weary were. When back returning to Milan again, they, by commandment of Diana, there her whelmed with stones. Yet Faunus for her pain of her beloved fanchon did obtain that her he would receive unto his bed. So now her waves pass through a pleasant plain, till with the fanchon she herself do wed, and both combined themselves in one fair river spread. Natheless Diana, full of indignation, thenceforth abandoned her delicious brook, in whose sweet stream before that bad occasion so much delight to bathe her limbs she took. But only her, but also quite forsook all those fair forests about Arlo hid, and all that mountain which doth overlook the richest champion that may else be rid, and the fair shore in which are thousand salmons bred. Them all, and all that she so dear did weigh, thenceforth she left, and parting from the place, thereon in heavy hapless curse did lay, to weet that wolves, where she was wont to space, should harbored be, and all those woods deface, and thieves should rob and spoil that coast round. Since which those woods and all that goodly chase doth to this day with wolves and thieves abound, which too true that land's indwellers since have found. End of Canto VI.